At first there were few, then there were many. Now there are hundreds detained under the state of emergency. Yet the PNM continues to criticize the government's decision to declare a state of emergency. Is the PNM just opposing for opposing's sake?
No, I think not. We have never been as irresponsible as that. We take the business of government, we take the business of opposition, we take the business of serving the people of Trinidad and Tobago too seriously to be that.
We're speaking to opposition Senator Fitzgerald Hinds. Mr. Hinds, there are over 300 people in detention. We have not heard any reports coming to our newsroom of these people being arrested under the preventive detention order. As an attorney yourself, how does this strike you?
Well, it strikes me rather interestingly because this is precisely the point we had been making. So far, of all the persons who have been arrested, it appears as though they have been arrested on the basis of existing laws, and they can have been so arrested without the need for emergency powers. So what the government has done is to give unto itself emergency powers. In so doing, denied all of us of our constitutional rights, put the city on hold, put the country on hold. Millions of dollars are being lost. And so many conflicting messages from spokespersons for the government. It is very baffling. We don't know the real reason. The last we heard is that when we go to the Parliament on Friday to debate a possible extension of these powers, we will hear more about how the government averted some plot touching and concerning some drug find at the airport a long time before the the emergency powers was implemented. And from the reports we've been having, they've been going around the place and picking up young people. I saw Mr. Gibbs describing them as gang members before they have even been tried.
But surely you were once a minister in the Ministry of National Security. You would be aware that there's lots of information that is garnered through intelligence or so that is not shared. So could the scenario be that they're acting based on intelligence that they would have gathered? They're using the existing legislation before they pounce with the emergency legislation?
Well, you will recall in terms of preventative detention in the 1970s, you and I were around that time, they arrested a number of persons and took them to Nelson Island. That would have been under the preventative detention emergency powers, which the Minister of National Security has to order if he thinks it fit. And the tribunal that the learned Chief Justice established, chaired by Senior Counsel Gilbert Peterson, with another senior counsel and another senior lawyer, and a paid public servant as secretary, so far, they would have had no work to do. And you see, the circumstances today are very different from 1970. In 1990 as well, there was an enemy. There were some insurgents. They took over, they challenged our democracy. And therefore, some may have been arrested on the basis of the preventative detention powers. But today, there's no such enemy. There's no resistance. If you look at the posture of the police in the society, in fact, there are people who are traveling from south and from the east telling you they're seeing one police vehicle anytime during the night. Well, not night, but during the day.
Again, I get to the point. You were a minister in the Ministry of National Security, and you know their strategies. They're going to have the police concentrated in one area one night and not in one area in the other. So us seeing nobody on Independence Square and maybe some people, some policemen in Aruka, it may just be a matter of strategy. So aren't we just being too hard on the government at a time when it is really attempting to arrest what is a real problem?
No, I think it is. I was making the point, when you look at the body language and the posture of the police, you will see for them it is business as usual. I'm making the point that what is happening now, you see, and yes, they're driven by some level of intelligence. They would have known all along who the gangsters, alleged gangsters, are.
As your government did.
As our government did.
And why do you think these kind of people are not pounced upon before?
Because there are laws there are constitutional provisions, and they were pounced upon to the extent that the laws and the Constitution provided it.
So this government faces the same dilemma?
Of course it faces the same dilemma, and this is the point we are making. It is about the option, it is about the choice. They decided to go with the ultimate weapon that the government has, a state of emergency, giving itself all of the powers that it has. However, so far, all of the activity we have seen, and I'm judging them from their track record over the last 5 days, all of the activities that we have seen can have been taken 2 Fridays ago without the need for the powers that they have now given unto themselves. And I'm asking the government to tell us, what do they hope to achieve by this? Because it's a high price for the economy and the people of the country to pay, a very high price.
But even when you were a minister in the Ministry of National Security, you told the media that there was information that you could not reveal because they are high national security matters. This can exist in this scenario.
Absolutely.
It's a highly sensitive scenario.
Absolutely. However, you would recall that when the state of emergency was first pronounced by the Honorable Prime Minister, the first issue was the upsurge in crime in Arima. I think about 9 people got shot and 4 died. Then you would have heard about some killings in Laventille. And then as former Senator, Senior Counsel Martin Daly made his intervention and said, listen, and I see you had the Attorney General discombobulated on these matters a few nights ago.
I'll check my dictionary.
Yes. When Mr. Martin Daly of Senior Counsel intervened, he said, listen, this will all be a colossal waste of time if the government cannot demonstrate that these supernatural powers that it has taken on itself was worth it in the context of finding a tremendous amount of guns and ammunition and bringing in some Mr. Biggs. That's what he said. Dana Sitahal, Senior Counsel, said, when she heard the idea of a limited state of emergency, like most reasonable people who are traumatized by crime and want to see something done, she said yes. However, she said, what I'm now seeing is different to what I imagined. So a lot of people supported the limited state of emergency only to discover that it was not limited. I'm saying further that all the actions taken by the government, and sadly, they are charging these young men under the anti-gang legislation, which we assisted them in passing because we understood the exigencies of the circumstances and the seriousness of the challenge that criminals pose. But little did I, I'm not speaking for anyone else now, little did I imagine that the government would have used this legislation in the manner in which it's now using it. What they are doing is going around picking up whoever they want to pick up, and on the advice of the Attorney General, charging them under the anti-gang legislation, which has implications for bail. And today the Commissioner spoke about their charge for gang-related activity. Well, I want to correct him. As far as I heard from their reports, gang-related activity has to do with a list of offenses, some of which, if we had time, I would share with you. Shootings, rape, robberies, extortion, a whole long list. Most of the young persons who appeared in court today, from the advice we have been having, are charged for allegedly being gang members, which is an offense by itself. You don't have to have marijuana, you don't have to kidnap, you don't have to shoot, you don't have to have a gun or ammunition. You are now just being alleged to be a gang member. For that, you can remain for up to 4 months in custody without bail. And this is why our political leader, Dr. Rowley, unpopularly as he may have, unpopular as it might have been, this is why the PNM, because we understand the thing. This is the reason why we held the view that what the government is doing is attempting to achieve some short-term political objectives. A lull in crime by taking them off the street, keeping them for about 3 months, and then we will see what the evidence shows up later, because a day will come.
But Mr. Hinds, your government identified that there were Mr. Biggs there to be had. This government has identified the big fish, and the big fish may have changed house, according to this government. The big fish is now the gang leader. it may not be those whom we defined them as earlier under your government.
Well, I'll tell you this. When I went to national security, and even as a former police officer, and I heard the word big fish, I understood what it meant. I grew up in the communities too. I grew up in Belmont and Laventille. And I grew up in conversation with people on the block. And the idea behind this big fish talk was them big shots from Westmoreland and from Goodwood Park and from Lange Park and all this kind of thing.
No, they may have been the big sharks, but the big fish were the gang leaders.
No. I understood immediately when I went into national security and good common sense that a big fish could have come white, yellow, brown, or black. And indeed, they came in all shapes and sizes from all parts of the country. And that big, by our definition in national security, had to do with the extent of your operation, your reach into Europe, into Africa, whatever, the extent of your dealings and the quantity of drugs that you may be dealing with. That is how we defined big. It had nothing to do with ethnicity, religion, or geography.
So from your
and I disabused my mind of that.
So from your information, your experience, your background, the big fish or the Mr. Biggs may well be in big business.
It's possible.
Also influencing
it's possible.
The leaders on the block.
It's possible. It's very, very possible.
But
however,
did you know this when you were in
it's
there?
a common sense position. However, when Senior Counsel Martin Daly made the intervention that I told you about a while ago, the government went into another panic, another knee-jerk. So what they started doing yesterday, I heard the Attorney General is trying to convince us, since in his mind, he has not yet brought in any big fish to satisfy the dailies of this world. He started equating the gang members yesterday with big fish. He said that they were big because they had a large gang network, they had money, they had guns, and they were well organized, and they had a creed.
But how do you know that that is not so?
Well, I'm not saying it is not so. I'm just saying to you, I find the government vacillating and giving us, they started out with the murders in Arima, and now we are hearing about the thing being linked to some drug find of 22 million. Well, I want to remind them, when we were there, we had a drug fine of $700 million worth of cocaine, and several persons who were transshipping it were arrested, and they have since been convicted and sentenced to serious terms imprisonment. And there was no state of emergency necessary in order to do that.
But there was also the case of a large amount of cocaine found on an island, and nothing has come out of it.
No, not that I'm aware of. That big cocaine on the island, they were arrested and charged for it. That's the one I'm speaking about. What I know is that a boat passed through here and was arrested in Spain. And you know what? You have hit the nail on the head. If you want to deal with the drug transshipment and consumption problem, if you want to deal with the oversaturation, as Dr. Rowley calls it so poignantly, of firearms in the society, where 12 and 13-year-olds have such easy access at low prices, if you want to deal with the wantonness and the stupidity and the ignorance and the lack of education and the rejection of so much opportunity and the life of crime as a choice, if you want to deal with those issues, a state of emergency for 3 weeks or 3 months will not cut it. I heard Mr. Volney unwittingly admitting this in today's newspaper, saying, not with any nobility, but unwittingly saying that the 3 week or the 15 days or 3 months would not do. In other words, he understands in his judicial mind that to deal with the problems that we are confronted with will take a considerably longer period. And this is why I would say on this point, we went for more sustainable ways of dealing with this. Our investments in education, our investments in a massive housing program, our investments in community development, and investments in national security and its platforms, because we were looking for sustainable management of this. And finally, we left office 2.5 years early. The fruits of what we had done for the last 1.5 years, 2 years, had now started to blossom, and the crime figures started to go down. This government came to office, met it going down, and enjoyed it. Last week, the thing started to turn back up, or recently, because of the negligence and the carelessness that they perpetrated.
Sorry, Mr. Hinds, I must interrupt you, but we get the point. But as we go, tell me, do you support the government's efforts to kill crime?
Absolutely we do. All that we have said and continue to say, this option of a state of emergency was not necessary, and their conduct so far by not using these powers to date and working under the anti-gang legislation, which was always there, supports that view.
Thank you.
I thank you very warmly as well.
You're watching the TV6 News.